Hi, this is Christian with Dark Portents, a grimdark and fantasy booktube channel. This is my first YouTube video, and I'm going to do the Booktube Newbie Tag today. And the first question for the Booktube Newbie Tag is, why did you start this channel? Because I'm really big in the online fantasy book community and really big in the online grimdark fantasy community, and I noticed that a lot of fantasy enthusiasts and reviewers, both on Booktube and on podcasts, have reviewed uh, like Joe Abercrombie and other grimdark novelists and Brandon Sanderson and a bunch of other high epic fantasy novelists, but that there are a few authors that I feel like are underappreciated, underrated. They don't really get the credit I think that they deserve, and aren't and may not even just be known to people in the fantasy community. Um, and I bought a couple of these books. I bought a copy of Priest of Bones and a copy of War, or sorry, a copy of A Crown for Cold Silver by Alex Marshall, and I mailed them to Daniel Green with a way too long handwritten note that he made a joke about in his unboxing video. But while I was writing the note and spending this money to ship it to Daniel Green, I realized that instead of lobbying famous booktubers that I follow to review the books I want them to review, maybe I should review them myself and start my own booktube channel. So that's the answer to that question. The next question on the Booktube Newbie Tag is, what are some fun and unique things that you can bring to Booktube? So one thing that I'd like to do is introduce more people to novelists like Ed McDonald and Anna Smith Spark and Peter McLean and Alex Marshall, and authors that are like under reviewed and under discussed on Booktube. But the other thing that I think is that I'd like to explore some of the philosophy behind and ideas behind grimdark fantasy in particular and high fantasy in general. And I think that my opinion about what the philosophy of grimdark is, or what the range of philosophy within the subgenre of grimdark fiction is a little bit different from what a lot of people say about that, and I want to kind of explore those philosophical concepts that I think are present in grimdark but are kind of overlooked, especially since grimdark fiction became more popular with Game of Thrones airing on TV and other grimdark television series coming out, but particularly the focus of Game of Thrones as like the introduction to grimdark fantasy for a lot of people, I feel like has colored a lot of people's perceptions about what grimdark is philosophically, what it says about human nature, and things like that. And I want to explore those ideas and put a little bit of a different light on them than I feel like is the usual interpretation of the philosophy of grimdark. The next question of the Booktube Newbie Tag is, what are you most excited for about this new channel? And for me, I'm excited to get involved in the Booktube community, meet new people. I'm excited to learn to edit videos, though that's also terrifying. And I want to explore different authors and new authors that I haven't read before, or that I have read but I haven't thought about in terms of like writing a review for them, and like learn to be good at reviewing books. And the next question for the Booktube Newbie Tag is, why do you love reading? And for me, reading, it helps me pass the time at work. I have a job where I am able to read audiobooks a lot, and the work is very monotonous, so it helps me pass the time, but it also is a very introspective process for me. I try to learn about my own worldview and about different possibilities for human experience through reading, particularly fantasy literature. So that's what reading does for me. I love falling in love with the characters. I love exploring the worldviews of different fantasy authors and what they have to say about the human condition. And um, also, it's just a lot of fun to read fantasy. What book or series got you into reading? So, when I was 4 years old, 4 to 6 years old, my dad read to me The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, and that got me excited about fantasy and about fantasy gaming and about getting into epic fantasy. So, since I was 4 years old, I was into reading epic fantasy and wanted to read more. I tried reading at like around the age of 6. I read The Hobbit myself after having had it read to me by my father. My dad tried to read Fellowship of the Ring to me after he finished The Hobbit, and it wasn't really conducive to him reading out loud to a kid, and it was like too much for me at the time. Though I've returned to it since then. I picked up my mother's copy of Eye of the World, the first Wheel of Time books, when I was like 6 or 7, and I could not read it. And it was just too slow. I couldn't get into it. And I returned to it a couple of times before I finally got over the hump of the like slow beginning to the Wheel of Time and got to the point where the farmhouse door gets kicked in, and if anybody out here is a real time fan that's watching this, you know what I'm talking about. And that was at around the age of 12, and from the age of 12 on, I was hugely into Robert Jordan's like modern style of epic fantasy, and I didn't. But it wasn't until I was an adult, many years later, after finishing The Wheel of Time, that I began to realized there was a whole world of modern epic fantasy beyond Robert Jordan that was in like a similar style and could deliver that same level of complexity to the world and to the writing that Robert Jordan did. So the next question is, what questions would you ask your favorite booktubers? Well, I've already asked each of them quite a few questions about starting a channel and other things, but particularly Murphy Napier was very helpful, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. But I guess, a question. What questions would I ask my favorite booktubers? I don't know. That's a tough one. I would ask Daniel Green why he hasn't read the Joe Abercrombie standalones yet. And I guess I would ask why I would ask each of them how they, with so many book recommendations that they get from their channels, from their fans, and so many books on their gigantic bookcases, how they choose what they're going to read next for the channel and how they like pace that out um, and yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question. So the next question is, what challenges do you think starting a booktube channel will be the hardest to overcome? And I think the answer to that is I am terrified of learning how to edit video, and I'll be learning that as soon as I finish shooting this. So that will be an interesting mountain to climb. Finding my place in booktube and like learning like what kind of videos I'm good at making and learning how to structure a good book review video are things that I'm concerned about, challenges I'm concerned about facing. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like those are the scariest things for me right now, but we'll see. We'll see what challenges are the hardest to overcome as we go. When did you start reading? Well, I already answered this in a previous question. So I started reading when I was like 2 years old, but when I started reading fantasy, and like more serious reading was like from the age of 4 on up. Where do you read? I read audiobooks at work, as I already mentioned. I read in the car, mostly audio. I read in bed, audiobooks to go to sleep, or Kindle to myself, or out loud to my wife. I read to my children when they go to bed. There's not really anywhere that I don't read. Wow. And then the last question for the Booktube Newbie Tag is, what kind of books do you like to read? And I've answered that question about 3,000 times already, but I love reading fantasy, particularly epic fantasy, and most recently I've gotten into grimdark fiction. Though I'm open to reading other genres as well. And I just started reading, for example, The Count of Monte Cristo, because I had heard it referenced so many times in relation to inspiration for a lot of fantasy books I love. So I started reading Count of Monte Cristo yesterday. I'm about 5 chapters in. All right, that's it for my Booktube Newbie Tag. And if you want to see me review and talk about some really cool, fun grimdark, stick around, like, and subscribe.